I'm here this morning. This is September the 13th, 2022. I'm with Reverend Chad McCharles of the Neepawa United Anglican Shared Ministry here in the Neepawa United Church in Neepawa, Manitoba. And Reverend Chad has quite a story to tell us here about a very famous chair. So I'll just pass it over to you and tell us what's up. Here.
I appreciate you taking the time to do this. As most will know by now, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed away recently, and as this is being recorded, we're in the midst of official mourning period here in our country of Canada and in all the Commonwealth countries where she's head of state. And so I thought it would be nice to put together just a little focus for our collective grief in our congregation, because Canadians collectively have many connections to Her late Majesty Elizabeth II. And so we have a veiled picture here, and candle and whatnot, but a special item from my own family is this chair. In our home, it's affectionately known as the Queen's chair. Now, it looks regal, as though it could be a Queen's chair, but there's more to it than that. My great-grandfather on my mother's side, Frank May, who was born in London, England, and sang in Westminster's Boys' Choir, emigrated to Canada, and eventually became head gardener for the legislature and government house in Winnipeg, for the province of Manitoba. And in 1970, when there was a royal visit to Manitoba, he was in government house in the royal suite, which the Queen often used to just come and refresh and get ready for the next event. He was in the room making up a display of flowers, doing up a floral arrangement for her. And she came in, and they spoke, and she sat in this chair in the suite and, refreshed and did what she did. And that was a great highlight for him as a monarchist. And so a few years later, when he retired, they were redoing the suite in Government House, and they asked him, Frank, what would you like for a retirement gift? Gold watch, what is it? Clock? And he asked for this chair because he knew Her Majesty had sat in it. And so he had it in his home. My grandmother, their daughter, had it in her home, and she gave it to us. And so it's a little piece of royal history, and it reflects sort of our royalists' leanings in our family. But for us in this congregation, I thought it might be a focal point for some of the collective grief that we're all feeling various levels and to various degrees.
So a number of people have seen this already. It was here on Sunday at last services, I assume.
Yes, lots of positive feedback, lots of interest in the story itself. And there was a question about, we are a United and Anglican combined congregation.
Yes.
Well, is this because of the Anglican side of the house? And I was quick to say, well, no, it's because we're Canadian.
Exactly.
After all, our national anthem officially is God Save the King now. We have many connections to the monarchy here in Canada, as our head of state, the monarch is. And so for us as Canadians, it's important to mark this. After all, it's been 70 years since we've been through anything like this.
Exactly. I mean, everybody is. It's just the time seems to be building too during the mourning period of people showing interest and devotion to the crown. It's amazing how it's actually swelling, isn't it?
Yeah. And we have actually had community members, not a part of our congregation, want to come and see the display during office hours, which is
so it will. People can do that. So it will be open and here for how long do you anticipate?
Until the mourning period ceases, which will be at the time of the funeral. So this may air after all of that, but it's going to be here for a little bit. So hopefully it'll still be available when you're seeing this. Good.
Thank you very much. And we'll just get a little close up. Can you tell me a little about the chair? Anything at all about it? You put a little crown on here.
Yeah, the crown is just sort
Chad,
of...
what's the story? Anything there?
A little focal point. It's actually a crown that I use during children's sermons for Christ the King Sunday, but I thought it fit as a sort of a draw of people's attention. And beside it, Dave, you'll see a portrait
Yes, yes.
That is
this
on
is
loan
another.
to the congregation from the Bailey family. And Brian Bailey and his parents and siblings hosted Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and their family on their farm in Carberry the very same trip the Queen sat in the chair and my great-grandfather knew about. And so there's a real connection there, and I know Brian will be sharing more about the portrait.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you for your time this morning,
Thank you,
Jed.
Dave.
Excellent story. Appreciate it.
Myra here, and I'm in the narthex of the Neepawa United Anglican Shared Ministry Church with Mr. Brian Bailey, and he is going to tell us the T. Roy Bailey family history with the Queen and her entourage in 1970.
Yes, well, you know, that was a rather special event. 1970, that's 52 years ago, and my dad was asked by the people who were organizing the royal tour if the royal family could come to the farm and relax. And not only relax, but just take a tour of the farm by horseback. So in July of 1970, we had the wonderful pleasure and honor of hosting Her Majesty the Queen, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, who is now of course King Charles, and Princess Anne. They came to the area by train. They stayed on the royal train, but in between sleeps, they were able to ride horses. And the horses were supplied to us by the musical ride, and the musical ride was currently playing in Brandon, so the horses didn't have to go far. And the Queen and Prince Philip, Princess Anne, and Prince Charles went riding on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock through the crops. The hired men were working in the fields. They checked out the wheat crops, they checked out the potatoes, they checked out the livestock. It was just a really pleasant time for all involved. And at the end of their ride, which lasted about 2 hours, they ended up in our backyard in our farm home in Carberry, where I was raised, and we had a garden party, at which time the royal family and our family chatted, and it was a chat. It was not unlike hosting the relatives. Lots of questions and lots of pictures being taken. I took pictures of everybody in the group, and the Queen was busy taking pictures of all of us. And so her camera was much superior to mine, and I'm hoping that maybe someday I'll be able to get my hands on some of the copies of the prints that she took that day. I'm wondering if they might be in the archives at Buckingham Palace. Anyway, that was the event. They spent an hour in the backyard, and Prince Philip spent most of his time chatting with my brothers about farming. And the Queen sat in just a regular lawn chair and talked to my mom and dad basically about the history of the farm and family, and just asking questions constantly. We weren't asking any questions of the Queen, and we had been told in advance the protocol would be, if you wanted to ask a question, you would say, "Your Majesty, I have a question for you," and then go with the question. But we didn't have to do that. And Princess Anne, she spent her time on a chaise lounge, just relaxing like any teenager would, realizing that, you know, this is really wonderful. Nobody around me to worry about, nobody taking notes, nobody, no media. There was no media there at all. It was just really us and the royal family, and that's what made it so special.
And now we have a beautiful photograph that you're going to tell us about of your family with the royal family as well.
Oh yes, this is a great conversation piece, this photo. It's a slight bit blurry, but I wasn't using the very best of equipment at that time in history, so, but you can tell who everybody is. Starting over on this side, this is my younger brother, Doug. I'm thinking he was 19 at the time. Princess Anne would be 18 at the time. Prince Charles would be 21. My wife is standing here, and you don't tell your wife's age. My older brother Alan in the background there.
Good.
And there's Prince Philip, obviously,
Yes.
Queen Elizabeth, my dad T. Roy, my niece Kimberly,
Okay.
And our hired man, and there's an interesting story about our hired man, Reggie, who came to our farm when my dad was 5 years old from a Bernarda home in England, and he was a staunch royalist. He thought he'd died and gone to heaven when he met the Queen. And this is my sister-in-law, Alan's wife, Margie, and Terry, who is currently farming Bailey Farms along with his 2 children, my mother, Nora, and myself on the edge there. And that's the family, the 2 families. The only other person in the yard was Sir Martin Charteris, who was the Queen's private secretary, and he was obviously the one who took the photo.
Great.
Yeah.
What a wonderful remembrance of the royal visit.
Certainly. You know, interesting little story. When they had finished their garden party, and Sir Martin says to the Queen, "I think, Your Majesty, it's time we left." Oh yes, right. And she presented my dad and mum with a beautiful family portrait that was personally signed. And then there was a race to the cars, because there were 2 cars that were going to take them back to the royal train, which was parked about a half a mile south of the farm. And of course they rode horseback to get there, but they weren't going to ride horseback back. So there were 2 cars, just ordinary cars, Chevys I think. And Prince Philip drove one of the cars. And Prince Philip, of course, had the Queen with him. But the second vehicle was being operated by either Prince Charles or Princess Anne. It was a race to see who would get to drive the vehicle. And I do believe that Princess Anne won that race, so she drove the second vehicle. Yeah, no chauffeurs, nothing. They were on their own.
Great.
Kind of neat.
Thank you, Brian, for your family history with the royal family. So cool.
You're welcome.